Zoe Channing had never been to a job interview quite like this one. As she stood in front of a towering, glass-walled building, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd gotten caught in some kind of prank show. Seriously, who in their right mind would hire a biologist to participate in an intergalactic mating program? The job description had been vague at best, and the email that had invited her to apply looked like it had been sent from an intern's daydreams. The Intergalactic Mating Program, or IMP as the humans had decided to call it, because abbreviations made everything sound less insane, was exactly what it sounded like. Earth had been officially inducted into the ranks of the galactic diplomatic community, and, apparently, the way to secure a real spot in interspecies cooperation was through genetic experimentation. That's right, mating. With aliens. Zoe had assumed the whole thing was some kind of bizarre cosmic misunderstanding or maybe an elaborate marketing stunt by a weird, futuristic dating app. But here she was, standing outside the facility, trying to convince herself she wasn't about to become a biological guinea pig in a cosmic science experiment. Inside, she was greeted by a cheerful, bald man in a lab coat, whose thick glasses and overly wide grin gave off the impression that he hadn't slept in at least 3 days. He introduced himself as Dr. Simon Fenton, and to Zoe's surprise, he seemed way too excited about her presence. "You must be Zoe," he exclaimed, extending both hands in a way that suggested he was about to shake her into another dimension. "The perfect candidate. You don't even know what's in store for you." Zoe blinked. "I'm really starting to wonder if I should have read the fine print of this gig." "What's in store exactly?" "Oh, it's very simple," Dr. Fenton said, completely oblivious to her skepticism. "You're going to help humanity with its future, all for the betterment of the galaxy. And, we might need to do a little bit of testing." He chuckled nervously, pushing his glasses back up his nose. Zoe's stomach lurched, but she nodded, trying to keep the sarcasm from spilling out. "Right. The testing part is what I'm worried about." "Not at all," Dr. Fenton said. "It's all completely natural, really. You're just going to have to, well, bond with an alien. The rest is just paperwork." The words, "bond with an alien," hung in the air like a strange perfume that made Zoe's head spin. "Excuse me, what now?" Dr. Fenton smiled, clearly thinking he was explaining things very well. "You'll mate with an alien. The genetic data exchange is important for the interspecies hybridization project we're spearheading. There's a whole treaty and everything. You're going to be a galactic ambassador of sorts. Isn't that amazing?" Zoe looked around the sterile, white walls, trying to make sense of what he had just said. Was he talking about mating, as in human reproduction, or was this some kind of scientific code for, "we'll run you through a battery of tests and give you a free t-shirt"? Before she could ask, he continued. "Oh, and you're probably wondering about the partner selection process. Don't worry. We've got everything covered. You'll be working with a very special subject. Very advanced. Very adaptive." He shot her a thumbs up. "You'll love it. Or at least, we hope you will. But really, this is about the future of humanity." Her pulse quickened. "I'm sorry, Dr. Fenton. I need a little more clarity here. When you say mate, do you mean I'm literally going to sleep with an alien?" Dr. Fenton blinked, as though the question was out of left field. "Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. But don't worry, Zoe. The alien will be very accommodating." At that, Zoe's mind raced. What kind of alien are we talking about here, exactly? Dr. Fenton leaned in, and for a brief second, Zoe thought he was going to whisper some terrible, absurd truth. Instead, he leaned back and pulled out a tablet from his coat pocket, swiping through images at lightning speed. "You know, the Lthar are extremely advanced beings," he said with exaggerated reverence, as though that somehow explained everything. "They can take on any shape. We've done tests." "Well, they've done tests on various human subjects already, but you're one of the first willing participants." He paused dramatically. "This will be an honor, Zoe." Zoe raised an eyebrow, wondering if this was an elaborate prank. "Willing participants? What's wrong with the unwilling ones?" "Ah." Dr. Fenton beamed, clearly pleased with her question. "You see, the Lthar have such a unique form. But don't worry, we've had them tone it down a bit for your comfort. At least at first." Zoe was already mentally backing out of the room, looking for the nearest exit. "Wait. Tone it down? You're telling me I'm supposed to mate with an alien, and you've somehow toned down their form for my comfort? How is that possible?" Dr. Fenton stared at her, almost pityingly, before pulling up an image on his tablet. The screen flickered briefly, then showed a humanoid alien. At least, that's what Zoe thought it was. The creature was vaguely human in shape, but its skin was translucent and shimmering with an iridescent glow. It had no face, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless head and long, sinewy limbs. One of its arms curled and uncurled like a tentacle. Zoe tried not to make a sound. This was not what she had imagined. "Meet Zertha," Dr. Fenton announced with great enthusiasm. "Zertha is our selected Lthar representative. She's going to help make sure your genetic exchange goes smoothly. You'll be working with her very closely." Zoe blinked several times. "You said, her?" "Oh, yes. The Lthar can take any shape. And Zertha prefers the female form for ease of communication with humans." He paused again, perhaps hoping she would be comforted by this information. "The process is very straightforward, as I said. Very scientific." Zoe's world tilted slightly. This was happening. There was no going back. She could either call her lawyer and flee, or she could lean into this ridiculous adventure. But as the image of Zertha floated in front of her, she realized that she was already too deep into the rabbit hole to back out. This was going to be her life for the next few weeks. At least she could say she had an interesting story to tell at dinner parties, assuming she ever got invited back to one. "I guess I'm ready," Zoe said, her voice thick with uncertainty. "When do we start?" Dr. Fenton practically bounced out of his chair, clapping his hands. "Fantastic. We'll get you prepped and ready for your first interaction. It's going to be a blast. You're about to make history, Zoe. You'll see. The future's so bright, you need galactic sunglasses." Zoe forced a smile. "History, huh?" This was starting to feel like the worst Tinder date ever. Zoe's first meeting with Zertha was not at all what she expected. In fact, if anything, it was even more absurd than she could have possibly imagined. They led her into a brightly lit room that looked like it was part laboratory, part luxury spa. There were strange, hovering devices that looked like a cross between high-end medical equipment and something you'd find at a massage parlor in a science fiction movie. Zoe felt oddly out of place, as though she had walked into someone's private dream about the future, where everything was both too clean and a little too sterile. Her stomach churned again, but she straightened up, trying to look as if she had the slightest idea what she was doing. Dr. Fenton had promised her a scientific preparation, which she now realized meant that she was going to be chemically and psychologically prepared for what was to come. The fact that chemically and psychologically had been used together in the same sentence only made her more nervous. "Don't worry," he said as he led her into a glass chamber where she was instructed to undress and put on a thin, silver bodysuit that looked like something out of a low-budget sci-fi movie. "This is all for your comfort. We'll make sure you're, well, in sync before the bonding process begins." "In sync?" Zoe asked. "With what exactly?" Dr. Fenton chuckled. "You'll see. You'll be introduced to Zertha shortly. I'd recommend you keep an open mind." Zoe just nodded, still trying to decide whether she should run or embrace the weirdness of the situation. If she did end up running, she might have just broken the space-time continuum. So, she'd probably better stick it out. A soft chime signaled the beginning of the next phase of the procedure. Dr. Fenton gestured to a door at the far end of the room. "Zertha will be waiting for you. Remember, be open, be receptive. The exchange is subtle but profound. And, above all, be ready for a deep connection." "Deep, Zoe. Very deep." Zoe nodded again, her brain fighting the rising panic. "Right. Deep connection. Got it." The door slid open automatically, revealing a shimmering, translucent figure standing in the center of the room. The Lthar had obviously taken Dr. Fenton's words to heart because Zertha was no longer the terrifying mass of wriggling tentacles Zoe had seen on the tablet. Instead, she was a humanoid figure. No, she was a humanoid figure, a tall, glowing being with soft lavender skin that rippled with what seemed like an internal light. Her features were delicate but somehow otherworldly, and her face was completely featureless except for two deep, glowing indentations where eyes would be. Her body seemed to shift fluidly, like a jellyfish caught in the water, yet it retained a human-like shape, at least, the parts that mattered. Her long, sinuous arms hung loosely at her sides, but her posture was graceful, almost regal. Zoe froze. For a second, she could do nothing but stare. Was this really happening? Was she going to have to connect with this? But Zertha smiled, or at least, the part of her face that would have been a smile if she were human shifted slightly, as if acknowledging Zoe's apprehension. "Hello, Zoe," Zertha's voice reverberated inside her head, a gentle, melodic sound. It wasn't spoken aloud, but somehow, Zoe could hear it as clearly as though it were, "Hi," Zoe stammered, trying to appear calm. "So, how does this work? Do we, talk first?" Zertha tilted her head slightly, and Zoe felt a strange sensation in the back of her mind, a kind of mental nudge, as though the alien were trying to communicate on a level beyond words. "Not quite how you imagine, Zoe. The bond we share is not of words, but of understanding. There is no talking between us as you know it. But I understand your discomfort. This process is unfamiliar to you." Zoe swallowed hard. She couldn't shake the feeling that the alien was reading her thoughts. In fact, it was starting to feel like the alien was in her thoughts, like there was no barrier between their minds at all. Dr. Fenton clapped his hands from the doorway. "Well, then. We're ready to begin the bonding process. Zoe, I trust you'll allow Zertha to guide you?" Zoe hesitated, but in the end, what other choice did she have? She'd already signed the contract, right? There was no backing out now. Besides, she couldn't say she didn't want to see what it was all about. And, if she was going to help humanity make history, or at least make an impression in the galactic dating scene, she might as well do it with style. Or with a mental breakdown. Either way, okay, Zoe said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. Zertha extended one long, slender arm toward her, and Zoe felt a rush of warmth pass through her as their fingers touched, well, as Zertha's fingers touched her hand. The alien's skin wasn't quite like anything Zoe had ever felt before. It was both soft and somehow firm, as though it was made from some substance that wasn't quite solid. She could feel the alien's energy radiating through her, a pulse that matched her own heartbeat. She shuddered but didn't pull away. Immediately, her mind began to whirl with visions, fractals of alien worlds, landscapes beyond her wildest dreams. Cities made of living metal, gigantic, floating mountains covered in strange, phosphorescent plants, vast oceans of liquid light. She saw creatures that didn't even resemble anything on Earth, floating jellyfish-like entities, gargantuan winged beings, and other forms so alien, she couldn't even begin to understand them. But amidst the chaos, Zoe felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't just visions anymore. It was knowledge, alien knowledge, ancient and vast. The Ulthar had existed for millennia, their species evolving beyond biological needs, beyond physical form. They had become energy, transcended the limitations of matter. And now, they wanted something from humanity. They wanted the adaptability that humans were born with, something the Ulthar had lost long ago. Zoe snapped back to reality, gasping for air. She pulled her hand back, but Zertha's arm followed, lightly brushing against Zoe's side. She looked up at the alien, her heart racing. You're trying to use humans, Zoe whispered, a cold realization sweeping over her. You're not just trying to mate. You want our genetic material, don't you? Zertha tilted her head again, her glowing indentations narrowing slightly, as if in surprise. You are more perceptive than I anticipated, Zoe. But yes, the human genome holds something vital that we have lost, an adaptability that can allow us to evolve beyond the limitations of our biology. But you didn't tell me any of this, Zoe said, feeling both betrayed and oddly empowered. This whole program, it's a cover, isn't it? Dr. Fenton stepped forward, looking a little too pleased with himself. You're catching on. You see, the Ulthar are dying, in a sense. Their evolutionary trajectory has stalled. But humans, your adaptability, your ability to thrive in any environment, it's exactly what we need. What they need. Zoe felt her heart sink. She had been chosen not because she was special, but because her genes were valuable in a way that wasn't ethical, or moral, or even decent. She was a pawn in an intergalactic chess game, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. That's why you need me, Zoe said, her voice cold. You want to use me to create something new. Something that can survive anything. But you're not telling the public the real story. Dr. Fenton shrugged, a little too casually. Science is about discovery, Zoe. Sometimes, you have to take risks to advance the species. And as for the public, well, they wouldn't understand. But you do. You're different. Zoe shook her head, furious and more than a little scared. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't even known was being played. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to turn the tables. Because now she knew the truth, and the truth was something the Ulthar didn't want anyone to see. Her hands clenched into fists. I'm not doing this, she said, her voice low and firm. Not for you. Not for anyone. She didn't know exactly how she would stop this insane experiment, but Zoe knew one thing for sure: she wasn't about to let the Ulthar, or the humans running the program, get away with it. The war for the future of humanity had just begun.